Welcome to the debate. Imagine you are sitting, right behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office. A rogue nation has just armed a nuclear warhead.
Right. The clock is absolutely ticking.
Exactly. The clock is ticking. Do you pick up the phone to offer a calculated diplomatic off-ramp, hoping to talk them back from the ledge, or do you immediately threaten absolute catastrophic financial and military ruin to force their submission?
It's a terrifying scenario.
It really is. And the material we're analyzing today, an AI-generated synthesis titled Clash of Titans, examines exactly this. It presents two profoundly incompatible paradigms of American presidential power. On one side, we have the unapologetic leverage-driven dominance of the Donald Trump model.
Yeah, and on the other, the strategic charm and calculated diplomatic restraint of the John F. Kennedy model.
Right.
And the stakes here, they aren't theoretical, they are existential. We are really trying to answer a central question today. Does effective global and domestic leadership require explicit leverage, unyielding pressure, and a willingness to completely disrupt the system? Or does true power demand institutional trust, careful diplomatic restraint, and an unwavering commitment to democratic unity?
Well, I'll be arguing that in a modern world defined by unpredictable, hostile states, the transactional, strength-based paradigm of massive leverage is the only actual way to secure national interests.
And I will argue that the diplomatic paradigm of calculated restraint and institutional integrity isn't just a nicer way to govern. It is the absolute prerequisite to preventing catastrophic global escalation and, frankly, the collapse of our own democracy at home.
Let's start right at the foundation of this strength-based paradigm, because it fundamentally rejects the romanticized view of statecraft. The core premise here is that diplomacy without leverage isn't diplomacy at all.
You're saying it's just begging?
It is just begging. When you strip away the geopolitical niceties, the harsh reality is that hostile countries do not respect moral high grounds, they respect power, period.
Right, but
The argument is that you only get tangible results through unrelenting pressure. Crushing sanctions, credible military threats, and negotiating exclusively from a position where you can destroy the other side's economy or military.
But strength without wisdom is incredibly dangerous.
Well, this requires a brutal honesty. It requires breaking through polite political norms to fight for actual outcomes, even if it immediately sparks conflict. Because the threat of overwhelming consequence is the only language every single dictator on Earth understands.
I have to say, I look at this entirely differently. The counter paradigm, which is anchored heavily in the lessons of the Cuban Missile Crisis, argues that when you are dealing with the brink of nuclear war, relying purely on brute force leverage is a suicidal gamble.
A gamble? Sure, but sometimes a necessary one.
But survival requires restraint. It requires keeping channels of communication open, not just constantly ratcheting up threats. The foundational logic here is that diplomacy is not a symptom of weakness. It is the ultimate exercise of controlled strength.
Yeah, I understand the theory behind that.
You win a war by making it unnecessary. And you build global stability on mutual respect, not by holding a gun to the head of every nation you deal with.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that, especially when we are staring down adversaries. I want to offer an analogy to explain exactly how this transactional approach functions, because I think people misunderstand it as just blind aggression.
Go ahead.
Think of global geopolitics as a ruthlessly pragmatic corporate buyout.
A corporate buyout. Okay.
Yeah. Rogue regimes behave exactly like hostile competitors in a vicious, unregulated market. They aren't going to be swayed by a persuasive PowerPoint on human rights.
No, obviously not.
Right, they only respond when you cut off their supply lines, squeeze their profit margins, and threaten a hostile takeover that will leave them with absolutely nothing. I have to admit, when I look at the argument for, restraint against unpredictable modern regimes, it seems completely naive.
Naive? How so?
If you offer an off-ramp before applying maximum leverage, you alter their cost-benefit analysis in the wrong direction. You teach them that aggression yields concessions. You have to force compliance because the alternative for them must be total ruin.
I understand the appeal of the corporate buyout analogy. I really do. But let me explain exactly why it fundamentally collapses when applied to nuclear-armed nation-states.
I'm listening.
Nations do not operate on a profit motive. They operate on a primal instinct for survival. In a corporate boardroom, a hostile takeover ends with the CEO getting a golden parachute.
Right.
In geopolitics, a hostile takeover ends in thermonuclear exchange, or at the very least, a catastrophic regional war. The material we're looking at highlights a critical psychological mechanism here: survival panic.
Survival panic?
Yes, when you corner a regime with overwhelming leverage and give them no out, you trigger a deeply irrational, violent response. They stop calculating costs and benefits, they just lash out.
So you back off?
That is why the diplomatic paradigm argues that true leadership is knowing when not to pull the trigger. You have to leave the adversary a way to de-escalate without losing face or their very existence.
But providing an adversary a way to save face almost always devolves into appeasement. Think about the game theory here.
It's not appeasement, it's strategy.
But if a hostile actor knows you are terrified of triggering their survival panic, they immediately weaponize that fear against you. They will push the boundaries further and further, enriching more uranium, funding more proxies, because they know you will continually prioritize restraint over confrontation.
In the strength paradigm, there's a concept akin to the madman theory. If you project absolute dominance, and even a slight willingness to be unpredictable and disproportionate in your retaliation, the adversary actually becomes more cautious. You enforce peace by making the risk of crossing you completely unfathomable.
But the flaw in relying on the madman theory is that it assumes you can perfectly control an inherently unstable dynamic.
You're dictating the terms. But if your only tool is the threat of annihilation or complete economic ruin, you leave absolutely no room to resolve the underlying friction. You aren't curing the disease, you're just putting a lid on a pressure cooker and turning up the heat.
Until they submit. But eventually, a miscalculation happens, a radar glitch, a rogue general, a misunderstood military exercise, and because you've eliminated all trust and communication in favor of pure leverage, there's no mechanism to stop the escalation. You don't avoid war by threatening it constantly, you actually make it inevitable.
Well, if we follow that logic, then how a leader views power fundamentally dictates how they treat everyone, not just adversaries, but allies.
Absolutely. And this is where the debate gets incredibly uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary. If the world is strictly transactional, then alliances inevitably become friction points. I want to defend the America First stance here, because the mechanics of systemic exploitation are real.
Okay, let's hear it.
For decades, the structural reality has been that allied nations enjoyed the absolute benefits of an American military umbrella while deliberately underfunding their own defense.
Are you saying they were just free riding on the alliance?
Exactly. It's a massive moral hazard. If allies know the security guarantee is unconditional, that it's based purely on trust and shared democratic values, they have zero financial incentive to contribute their fair share.
I see the financial argument, but
Why spend your own GDP on tanks when the Americans will do it for you out of a sense of duty? The strength paradigm argues that trust does not win deals or secure borders. Tangible resources do. Renegotiating these agreements, threatening to pull out of NATO, or tearing up trade deals isn't abandoning allies. It is a necessary, forceful corrective to force accountability.
But you have to look at the massive unseen costs of extracting that accountability. What is the actual currency of global stability?
Leverage.
No, it's predictability, it's trust. Treating long-standing alliances as purely transactional ledgers destroys the bedrock of the international order.
I'm not sure I agree it destroys it.
Percentages, you introduce profound doubt. And the mechanics of that doubt are terrifying. When allies begin to question whether their primary guarantor will actually show up in a crisis, they have to hedge their bets.
By building up their own militaries, which is exactly what the transactional leader wants.
No, by seeking alternative security arrangements. They might decide they need their own nuclear weapons, triggering a regional arms race. Or worse, they might start aligning economically and militarily with the very authoritarian regimes we are trying to contain.
That's a stretch.
Is it? You might squeeze a few $1 billion in defense spending out of them in the short term, but you fracture the unified bloc that actually deters global aggression. The diplomatic paradigm insists that a superpower doesn't lead by isolating itself and sending a bill, it leads by anchoring a coalition that is too strong for any adversary to challenge.
Yeah, I just don't think a coalition held together by the warm feeling of mutual respect is a credible deterrent.
It's more than warm feelings.
But when push comes to shove, deterrence is rooted in the empirical reality of military and economic might. If the coalition is full of weak links who have underinvested in their own capabilities for 30 years, the coalition is a paper tiger. Transactionality forces them to be actual partners, not dependents.
But a true partnership means standing together in a crisis without demanding a concession in return. If every interaction is a negotiation, you don't have allies, you have customers. And customers will take their business elsewhere the moment someone offers them a better deal.
Well, that tension between treating relationships as transactional versus trust-based doesn't stop at the water's edge, though.
No, it certainly doesn't.
This framework inevitably bleeds into the domestic front. If a leader views all global relationships as zero-sum power struggles to be dominated, how does that mindset translate to the incredibly fragile ecosystem of a domestic democracy?
It tears the fabric of the country apart. This is exactly why the diplomatic paradigm is so fiercely protective of domestic institutions.
Right.
The material we are analyzing emphasizes the profound fragility of a democratic system. Democracy is not a machine that just runs automatically. It is entirely dependent on an invisible web of trust, integrity, and shared reality. We call it an epistemological ground.
The idea that we agree on facts.
Exactly. The idea that even if we fiercely disagree on tax policy or healthcare, we agree on basic facts and the legitimacy of our institutions.
And the argument is that the transactional leader destroys that ground.
Absolutely. When a leader brings that combative zero-sum leverage back home, they start treating the press, the judiciary, and the opposition party exactly how they treat hostile foreign states, as enemies to be crushed or leveraged.
I see.
They erode the shared reality. A democracy simply cannot survive when facts are treated as just another negotiating tactic, or when truth is determined by whoever is the loudest and most disruptive. A leader's words literally shape the nation's reality. They have a fundamental duty to unite rather than divide. Because when you systematically break down trust in the institutions of truth-finding, the democracy collapses from within.
Okay, I have to challenge this concept of unity, because it often feels like a rhetorical trap.
A trap?
Yes. What the institutional elites call unity is very frequently just the silence demanded of the disenfranchised. You're arguing that disruption destroys the system, but the strength paradigm argues that democracy desperately needs disruption because the system itself has become insulated and unresponsive. It demands real honesty.
How do you define real honesty in this context?
It means speaking the uncomfortable, ugly truths that a massive portion of the public is feeling without filtering it through the sanitized, polite language of Washington.
But decorum has a purpose.
The diplomatic paradigm prizes institutional decorum over everything. But if those institutions have shipped jobs overseas, engaged in forever wars, and ignored the working class, then preserving the integrity of those institutions isn't noble, it's complicity.
I wouldn't call it complicity.
Disruption isn't an autoimmune disease killing the country. It is an immune response of a democracy fighting back against a leadership class that has failed it.
But there is a massive difference between reforming a corrupt institution and burning the concept of institutional truth to the ground.
Is there, when the institution is fundamentally broken?
Yes. If disruption shatters the public's belief in the very mechanisms we use to resolve disputes, like elections or the courts, then you aren't fixing the system. You are replacing the rule of law with the rule of force.
I think that's a worst-case scenario view.
When a leader is advised to unite the country, it doesn't mean silencing dissent. It means maintaining the structural container where dissent can safely happen. If every domestic disagreement is treated as a battle to be won through sheer unapologetic leverage, you eventually run out of political adversaries and begin cannibalizing your own society.
The counterargument, though, is that true democratic representation requires taking power forcefully back for the people, even if it causes massive friction. Sometimes the polite consensus is factually broken.
Friction is one thing, destruction is another.
Thank you for joining us for this analysis. Until next time.